So if any of you haven't heard one of the other stories that I shared here this week, I'll give you guys some background. So, I am and have been a paramedic for about 10 years. My entire career has been spent in emergency medicine, responding to 911 calls and providing advanced life support for life-threatening illnesses and injuries. The calls that we respond to range from inappropriate use of an ambulance to minutes away from death, and oftentimes it's already too late. If you've heard my other story here, then you know the background, but in 2014 I moved to another city a couple of hours away from home to work. The city was smallish, less than 100,000 people, but the ambulance serviced the entire county where the city resides. At the time, too, there was a significant oil boom in the area, so thousands of people flooded the city and the county to work in the oil fields nearby. This caused the city to get a little rougher, as you had people from just all over the country moving there to work, and that many people in a small place increased the cost of living, and we saw a large increase in violent crimes, as well as traumatic injuries too. We worked 24-hour shifts, which weren't too bad. The days were usually somewhat busy, and at night the ambulance station had rooms with twin beds that allowed you to get some fairly decent sleep at night. Most of the calls that would classify as crazy or creepy or scary always tend to come at night though. So, the day that this story takes place was a little bit different than normal. Normally I get an EMT basic partner, which means that since I'm the advanced provider on the truck, I get all of the patients. But today I had another paramedic partner because we were actually training in a new hire paramedic. It was her first day in FTO, field training orientation, and this means that we generally let her take the calls and sit back and evaluate her performance to ensure that she's capable and doesn't kill anyone. This was her first job after graduation, so she was still pretty green. I could see that she was very nervous as well and trying really hard to do her best. So, as per usual, the day was pretty busy, but as it began to wind down, I was getting ready to attempt to take a nap. I kick off my boots and I lay down on the bed, on the top of the covers. Easier to get up and going that way if a call comes in. I put my radio up on my bed, full volume like I always do, so I can be sure to wake up if we get a call. And, sure enough, midnight starts to roll around, and I hear a call to go out. Dispatch says man who has been stabbed is not breathing. Luckily it's not my call, and another ambulance responds, so I go back to bed, or at least try to. Because about 30 minutes later, another call goes out, and this time, it's definitely for me. The dispatch information is man with a knife wound in his hand, police are on the scene. I get my boots on, wake up the girl and my partner, and walk out to the ambulance. The area of the call was right smack dab in the middle of downtown. We responded not emergent, as it was not a life-threatening injury. And as we arrive on the scene, there's probably around 6 police cars on scene, all with their lights on. The area itself was through an alleyway and behind a building just off the main street. As we pull up, there are a number of officers, a couple of sheriff deputies and a detective, all standing around this man with a rag on his hand. As I got closer, I could see the man was bald, middle-aged, and had almost a homeless look to him. He also had a big dark spot in the middle of his forehead. One of the officers approached me to fill me in on what was going on before I talked to the guy and start to treat him. The officer tells me that the man has a large laceration on the back of his hand that he received from a knife. At this point, I was still a bit groggy and didn't put two and two together, but the officer says that the man said that he was attacked by another man and that he's probably going to need stitches. So, as it's not too serious, I have my FTO approach first to begin her assessment and give me her treatment plan. I stay close behind her and we both walk up to the man who was in handcuffs. As we approach, the dark spot on the guy's forehead is now clear, on the center of his forehead, stretching from his eyebrows and what would have been his hairline, is the biggest swastika tattoo that I have ever seen. My FTO begins to talk to the man as I stand back and observe. Something about that man's general composure too and responses just really chilled me. When we first walked up, the man was muttering something underneath his breath. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but he was repeating it over and over. My FTO asked police to uncuff him to see the cut on his hand more clearly, At this point, one of the other officers produced the knife that he believes to be the weapon that caused the injury. The knife was in an evidence baggie, and it was just covered in blood. It was nothing special, though. It just looked like a cheap plastic pocket knife or something, like you would buy at some cheesy gift shop. It was a folding knife, though, with a black plastic handle and a blade that was maybe 3 inches long, with a bit of a serration towards the handle, perhaps. The man showed us his hand, and on the back, cutting right through another large swastika tattoo, was a laceration that went from the base of his pinky finger to the lower fleshy part of his thumb. It was quite wide also, maybe 3 centimeters, exposing the bones of the metacarpals as well as tendons. The bleeding had mostly stopped with pressure from the towel that he was holding onto. And when my partner asked the man what had happened, the man then repeated to us what he'd been repeatedly muttering to himself. "I killed him, man. He's dead, man. I had to kill him. He's got to be dead." At this point, I'm starting to put it together as well and understanding the larger picture here. We get the man into the ambulance, though, so we can assess for any other injuries that may not be visible under his clothing. After a thorough search, we realize that there are no other injuries, so we begin to transport him to the hospital. My FTO bandaged the man's hand, and as we're driving, I start to ask questions to try and figure out the details. The man told me everything that I wanted to know, and never lost that chilling vibe, mind you, staring distantly as he recounted what happened. The man told me that he's homeless and was wandering around when a friend offered him a ride. He says that he was leery of the man. I think he meant wary, but decided to get in anyway and accept the offer. The man said the friend began asking him if he hated black people. The man said that he didn't, obviously, and that he wasn't racist. And he tells me that this is when his friend became upset with him and tried to stab him with a pocket knife. The man said that he attempted to defend himself, managed to wrestle the knife away from his friend and stabbed him back before jumping out of the car and running. So, with this shocking telling of the tale, we continue to transport the man in silence. Also, as a side note as well, an officer rode in the ambulance with us the whole way, which, with what happened at the end of this story, I'm actually very thankful for. So after we dropped the man off at the ER, we all just kind of sat there, sort of shocked, leaving the hospital. We returned to the station and tried to get some sleep, but we were just not destined for sleep that night, and an hour later we get another call for a body removal from downtown, less than 3 blocks away from our last call. We pull up to the area, which is in the middle of the street. The street itself is blocked off 100 feet on both sides by a fire truck and police cars. The fire truck was equipped with a double stack of 4 halogen lights, risen up the ladder shining down to illuminate the area. Walking up with the stretcher and the body bag, the detective on scene tells us that they're done with the investigation and that they're ready for us to take the body to the medical examiner's office. At this point, we're still about 50 feet away from where the body lay. From where we are, I can see the person lying in the middle of the street, though. We get closer and take a few minutes to examine the body, and what I see and putting together what I was told is just astonishing to say the least. So the man, another middle-aged man mind you, appears white or possibly Mexican, lays in the middle of the street on his back with his arms spread eagle and his legs straight. There's a vehicle parked on the side of the road with its driver door still open. I figured that this must be the guy's vehicle, but it was parked neatly, not haphazardly or incorrectly. The deceased man has streaks of blood coming from his nose and mouth, with several small puncture wounds on his face and cheeks. And looking at his torso, there are about a dozen more knife-shaped puncture wounds in the chest and the abdomen, and most of the wounds were so jagged and barbaric looking that you could see like fatty tissue pushing out of them. There wasn't much of a blood puddle under the man, but a very large trail of blood ran from the man to the side of the street where the curb was. The blood then continued its flow another 10 feet along the curb before spilling into a storm drain. And with that much blood, the man was exsanguinated and let out there in the middle of the street. We packed the man into the body bag and we transported him back to the ME's office. When we got back to the station, my charge medic told me that the officer that rode with the first patient requested that we fill out a report on what we heard the man say. Thankfully, the rest of the shift was pretty uneventful. But fast forward to a couple of years ago, I received a call from the state's attorney. He told me that this person is going to trial for murder, is pleading not guilty, and he would like to go over my statement with me as I would be a key witness and require my testimony in court. We went over my statement and we talked about it a bit. Then he told me that he would be in touch and wished me a good day. A few days later, he calls me up again and informs me that the man changed his plea to self-defense and that I was needed in court in a week. And literally, one day before the trial, he calls me up again and he tells me that this time the man changed his plea to guilty and I was no longer needed. I don't really know what happened after that, if I'm being honest. I never really looked into it because, well, it's just another brick in the wall, so to speak. A story filed away in my brain and probably never to be forgotten. This happened to me, a 23-year-old female, and to a good friend that I had, Jenny, when we were both in high school, so probably about 6 years ago. We were 16 and we loved drinking and smoking, but since we were underage, we had spent quite a few nights standing next to a convenience store waiting for an adult stranger who agreed to buy us something to drink and cigarettes with our own money, of course. But the store is in a pretty trafficked part of town. A lot of people come in and out of the cars, buses, pedestrians, pretty much from all over the place. Also, we live in a pretty safe city, pretty much no crime. We can walk at nights, in fact, at 3 a.m. without having to worry too much. And I remember this one time where Jenny and I walked to this store to try and buy some cigarettes. It wasn't too late in the evening when we succeeded, and sat on a bench next to the store for a smoke, when a strange man looks at us, parks his car and exits the driver's seat to open all of his car doors and stand there. Weirdly too, he was sort of staring at us, at different parts of his car and then at the floor. He looked like he was in his late 50s, frizzy white hair and eyes that looked extremely unaware, but not frantic or anything. Now, I don't know if most girls are like this. I know I'm not, and my logic says that we shouldn't be like this for the most part, but I seem to attract girls who are very engaging when a person who screams stranger danger approaches them. Creeps, weirdos, men who just awkwardly disturb us just to hit on one of us, even though none of us are interested. But somehow, every good girlfriend that I've had this very annoying and, may I say, unsafe habit to entertain these sorts of harassers. And this man felt incredibly off to me. And I remember Jenny looking at him, then me in a confused look when he walked towards us, a few meters from his car with all of his car doors still open. He stood like 2 meters away from us and about a meter from his car, starting a babbling monologue about how he lost his phone inside of his car, he thinks perhaps underneath the seat. My heart is beating quickly just from thinking about this too, but he didn't give us a second to respond before asking us to look for it for him. Jenny stands up and starts walking to his car. I don't know much about cars. It was an old grey standard vehicle, not a van or anything, but I yelled, "Hey Jen, what are you doing? Don't go inside a strange man's car." The man noticed this, and Jenny says, "I'm not getting inside, relax. I'm just looking from the outside with a flash camera." He says, "No, please, just look inside to find it." She put maybe 1 foot inside, but I gave her a look, and I try to entertain this situation, and mostly him, so that he would notice that she's inside of his car behind him. So I ask the man, "Why do you think your phone is underneath the seat, anyway?" "Well, I was driving here and heard it ring from somewhere inside the car when my daughter called. I thought it might be inside my pocket or something." "And it isn't? How would you know that it's your daughter if you lost it?" "No, it might be in my pocket. I don't know. Can you check?" Walks a little closer to me. He had a really confused look, like he sincerely didn't know where his phone was, like he was a kid. "No. What? Ew. Why would I check your pocket? You're a grown man. Check it yourself." By this time, Jenny comes back to stand near me as this man is a complete weirdo and is scaring us now. As he continues to ask and beg us to check inside of his car, I just flat out tell him no and that I can call his number for him to see where the ring is coming from if he really wants. The man says that he's out of battery, so it wouldn't help. Keeps asking to basically crawl into his back seat. Thank God for extreme situational alertness while in situations of stress like this, because the next thing I said may have saved Jenny, who was completely engaging and stood next to his car for a long while. Hey, so you said your daughter just called you and that you heard it from inside the car? And if you didn't find the phone since then you have no way of knowing the status of your battery. And if you did, then you're harassing us, sir, and we're leaving. Good luck finding your phone inside your pocket yourself. Now revisiting this story, I'm aware that there could be reasonable explanations to all of this that could contradict this whole creep guy narrative, sure. Maybe he was just too old to bend over to look for his phone. Maybe this was an emergency and that's why he was so incoherent and anxious to find his phone. Maybe he was out of battery and his speakerphone in his car passed his daughter's next phone call over to the car system. But nothing I can really think of can explain him being so stubborn with wanting us inside the car, or the fact that he wanted me to look inside of his pocket. So, whatever reasons that could make this story less creepy, they don't really stand given all the circumstances.